There's a new build in China that's really surprising people because no one's playing it currently. It's Yone Crowd Diver carry. Yone is often seen as a secondary support for other builds like maybe a Riven Edgelord back on PBE or maybe a complementary unit that can hold items in Heartsteel. But Yone 3 is actually so powerful if you compare it with one of the most powerful verticals in the game, 6 Crowd Diver. In today's In Too Deep, we dive into one of the off-meta comps that's currently actually taking China by storm, played by one of the top ladder players in China, 60second. And while there are some lucky moments that bail out 60second, after this game, you'll be also convinced that Yone is the only way. All right, so we're hopping on board 60second, who's having a great ladder day so far, 2-3-1-4. 60second is often compared to Setsuko. It's funny that I do videos on Setsuko and then I feel like I do a video on 60second. They're very close hand in hand in terms of their strong ladder performances that are very, very consistent. 60second currently about like 1100 LP or so on the Chinese server, and one of the top players currently that a lot of people always feel like is a threat in tournament. The cool thing about 60second in particular is that he's willing to play a lot of like unusual traits and unit combinations. He plays very flex. And so, you know, for example, just the game before this, I believe he was playing like a 6 Guardian flex dual carry with some random backliners. And so he's really willing to do some unusual stuff. For those of you who missed it, we are playing a 3 1-cost champion start portal, so that way you get a little bit of extra direction. 60second decides to sell and instead focus on making gold an economy. And he's doing a cool little trick by using Olaf, who's a 1-cost that can actually beat these creep rounds and not prioritize picking up anything, skipping things like a Lilia pair so you can focus on economy early. So already a little bit unusual, picking a unit that people don't really save and prioritize. Olaf is not considered very strong at the moment. And then trying to focus on gold, passing things like Superfan early. Now, when you have an early economy start, you want to think about what can I do with that economy? And the first thing that comes to mind when you have all this gold is either to 1, push levels really quickly, so go for like a fast 8, fast 9, or 2, go for a reroll composition. So those are the 2 things that he's probably going to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and take a look at his first augment choices. Right off the bat, some really nice choices. I'm looking at specifically Cybernetic Bulk, which is considered to be a very strong augment. The reason why Bulk is considered really strong in Set 10 Remix Rumble particular is because every frontline synergy synergizes with health very nicely. So for example, when you have bruisers and you get additional bonus HP, that scales with bruiser HP because it gives you also an additional bonus on top of that. And then things like sentinels, resistances, so you get extra HP with that as well. And then guardian scales their shielding. The only thing about it is that Cybernetic Bulk is much better later in the game because you get more items, and it's also more impactful when you're able to combine it with really strong items. And the other aspect of Cybernetic Bulk is that it'll make his board really strong, but based off his opener, he's unlikely to actually win streak. So Cybernetic Bulk is going to feel really weird. He's going to put items onto a champion and become really strong and tanky with getting 555 health. Then what if he wins like a couple fights against people who are also trying to lose streak, and now he's not able to actually go for a full 5 loss and his economy is going to be uneven. So I feel like Cybernetic Bulk's a little bit on the weaker side right now compared to usual because he's not prioritizing picking an early headliner and he's not trying to win streak. For the same reason, Roll of Dice is similar because Roll of Dice giving you a Radiant Thieves Gloves is potentially really strong, but the problem is, again, he might win by accident and doesn't exactly benefit from it immediately because he doesn't have a good unit to hold it. And then pumping up actually kind of works a little bit in that line of scaling his composition, losing early, and being weakest at stage 2 and get stronger and stronger. So I think you could justify either taking pumping up or Cybernetic Bulk because Cybernetic Bulk in the end is really, really strong, but I can also see him reroll all these options and see if there's something better. And so he chooses to reroll pumping up, which is totally fine, and roll the dice, it looks like, as well. And now he gets offered Cybernetic Uplink and going long. And I like that he held on to Cybernetic Bulk because this is just in case he doesn't find a better option. And going long is a little bit awkward because, well, one, it's a little bit of a weaker augment compared to some of the other econ things that let you fast 9. And also, again, kind of goes back to the thing that we're talking about, which is he's naturally going to level a lot and then as a result be a little bit stronger than he maybe wants to. And also, I just think going long is a little bit too weak at the moment. They probably have to buff this augment. Oh my god, I just looked it up. It's a 5.3 right now. Yeah, don't pick going long currently on this patch. It might buff in the future. Maybe we can reconsider it then. And I'm curious because Cybernetic Uplink is usually considered the weakest early. It's much stronger in the late game when you have like your entire setup with a bunch of casters and then you get a bunch of mana so you can go for big bursts. He has things like Spear of Shojin available as well, so he does have some synergy if he wants to play into it. The only caveat is Cybernetic Uplink doesn't have any synergy with his board immediately. It's not like Jinx is particularly really good with it. So I am curious. I think I'm leaning towards Cybernetic Bulk. Oh, he rolls it. And Curse Crown! Okay, so I think the only pickable option here that he might consider is Cybernetic Uplink because I think the other two are just very, very risky. Going long is quite weak, and then Curse Crown, I mean, no risk, no fun. All right, so he ends up going for Cybernetic Uplink almost out of necessity, and this is almost sort of like a punish for him not taking something that's a little bit safer because Cybernetic Prismatic bulk, like we talked about, is not something that he's looking for, but hey, looks like he had to do what he got to do. And I think this brings us to our first important lesson, which is take the safe guaranteed things instead of trying to risk and gamble for something better unless you're in a really bad spot. In this situation, 62nd is still so early in the game that it feels like he almost took an unnecessary risk, in my opinion, to gamble on a really powerful augment. And I understand there's some really powerful early game augments that you can get. If you want to go for a reroll composition, for example, getting things like a cool pact or a March of Progress can be extremely powerful for a Prismatic. And then you can also get some really nice things like, buried treasures or stationary support, which can help give you like a lot of tempo and items early on. So I totally get like why he rolled for it, but sometimes you should take the guaranteed thing, even if it's not necessarily what makes you really excited. Now, that being said, Cybernetic Uplink, it's not the end of the world. It's just that he's very weak early and he was going to lose streak anyways. He did at least commit to one thing, which is to put a tier onto the cannon so you get the true damage buff, just to help preserve just a little bit of HP. But he knows after scouting that he's unlikely to win. He's scouting the weakest boards, by the way. He's not actually scouting these people who are 100 HP, 96 HP, because he knows that those are people who are likely to beat him anyways, since they already like won at least one fight. And that's a really nice little tip for people who are trying to figure out how to ways to incorporate scouting into their gameplay. They think, man, there's just so many things to do. Should I scout all 7 players? Like, what am I looking for? You should always be scouting to answer a question. And in this case, he's trying to ask, how strong are the weakest players? Do I have to be careful not to make my board too strong? Do I have to sell my headliner, for example, because everyone's playing like a very weak board? You recognize there's, 4 to 5 units on some of these lower HP boards and says, hey, I can get away with committing my items and getting a little bit of cybernetic value. So even though he's committed to losing, he's not trying to just lose by 5 units every single time, trying to kill off 1 or 2 units every single round, which is really important. Okay, scouting around, he's like an early Poppy with Bloodthirst. That's a little bit scary. He also has a early Yone and Katarina with Crowd Divers. And the reason why I was told to watch this VOD is because I think it's a newer build that's coming up in China in particular. This build is oriented around Yone carry and trying to play around Crowd Divers in particular. And because he hasn't slammed things like the Spear of Shojin, he can actually commit to things like this Hand of Justice and Infinity Edge, or maybe wait for a Quicksilver and then play around a Yone carry. The theory around Yone carry is that Yone is a scaling champion that gets really strong as a fight goes long enough, and 6 Crowd Diver is such a powerful synergy that if you can get Yone 3, he's actually strong enough to deal with some of these fast 9 level boards where they get like a bunch of 2-star 5 costs. The thing about this composition is that it's difficult to hit, and you also have like an awkward mid game until you're able to get 4 Crowd Diver with either the Pentakill or maybe a Heartsteel. Nice thing is he has a lot of gold, so I would recommend going for this Heartsteel, right? So he can reinforce the amount of gold that he needs in order to get to this Yone. And this is actually a really good heads up play, which he recognized that, look, I could play a stronger board with Heartsteel and try to preserve more HP, but at this point, I'm committed to 5 loss and try to maximize my economy. And this is a really important thing of him leaning into his momentum, so that way he can have the max amount of resources. I see too many players at this point say, okay, well, you know what? I 4 loss anyways. It's fine if I win this last round. He's getting double that round interest goal. He's getting gold right now for his 5 loss, and then he gets another round of interest at the end of 2-7, which is really, really impactful. And when you are rolling for 3 costs, that is so much more expensive than you think than just rolling for 2 costs. Because if you're rolling for a 2 cost 3-star, you are not only rolling for something that's naturally cheaper, 2 instead of 3 gold, so 18 instead of 27, but also you get to level up and get those better odds at level 7. So it is not just a little bit more expensive, it's like exponentially more expensive to go for 3 costs. So if you know you're going to go for that setup, you might as well try to maximize your goal. Hits a Mordekaiser 2, which is really important. Also picks up a Yasuo headliner because it's a true damage unit and it can hold items while he starts racking up things for Edgelord. And now he gets the Heartsteel back in and goes back to losing. With Heartsteel, it's about the finesse, as you guys have probably seen in other videos, about not just if you're losing, but how much you're losing by, so you can maximize as much heart rewards as you can get. If you're looking here, you see 11 out of 20. Looks like he's actually too strong, by the way. Goes up against a birthday present level 5 player with Shojin on Yasuo. That's actually quite unfortunate because birthday present players are supposed to be a little bit strong because they're supposed to level ahead of curve and then utilize that extra level advantage to try to get like an early 2-star unit to snowball their momentum. So that's a really unfortunate loss as we take a look at the augment here at 3-2. And so we think that he's probably leaning towards his Yone reroll at the moment because it is a build that I think he looks like is uncontested. No one's really trying to go for it. And also it's a silver augment after prismatic, so the tempo is going to lower a lot, which brings us to like just an general important tip, which is keep in mind the tempo of the lobby based off the rarity of the augments. So if you're in a prismatic lobby, you have to kind of lean to the momentum direction of whatever's happening. If you're greeting, you probably have to greet a little bit harder so you can get like maximum value to spike. If you're trying to play tempo, it's going to be a little bit hard to fight for tempo because people are going to be stronger boards. So you got to think about these kinds of concepts back and forth. And it's also case by case. There's exceptions to what I even just said. Okay, so taking a look at the augments here, it's going to be Silver. He has partial ascension, which gives him a little bit of that combat strength that might work a little bit with Crowd Diver. The problem is it doesn't really fit with his board type because ascension works better when you have a lot of tanky units, like a lot of bruisers, a lot of sentinels, a lot of guardians. And in this case, he's playing Heartsteel and Yasuo. So partial ascension is probably not going to even activate and give him that 30% bonus damage. You got army building, which is a lot better than Silver Ticket in my opinion, because army building gives him the ability to spike a 2-star 3 cost and not have to roll as much. And plus, it looks like he wants to go for that reroll anyways. So I think I'm going to lean towards army building out of these 3, but it looks like he's going to reroll first. Harvest and Unify, which is actually not bad at all, but just given what we said already, he's going to lean into this Yone and try to make that happen. Oh my god, no way. Someone got starter kits, a 2-star 4 cost, and then recompopped into a Ziggs 2 at 3-2. Oh my god. No one's that good at TFT. Okay, well, this brings us to another important tip in TFT that you have to always remember. Some games are just completely unwinnable. That person that has Ziggs 2 so early is very likely to play first, so when you see someone egregiously high rolling, adjust your expectations for the game and play accordingly. So in this spot, it's actually even better that he actually has a reroll angle now, because a lot of people who are trying to go for like a fast 9 and dropping a lot of HP are going to struggle to beat this really strong Ziggs 2 board. And so therefore, they're going to be low HP. When they hit level 9, there's going to be fewer Ziggs in the pool, and then they're just going to lose to the Ziggs player anyway. So they're going to be at, 20, 30 HP trying to stabilize, and they take another loss. And so it's really important that he actually commits to something like reroll so we can potentially spike earlier, preserve more of that HP, and maybe bleed out. Interestingly enough, I think this actually might lean into his favor, assuming he's able to get things online quick enough. And right now, it's not looking that good because he's going up against someone who has 2 really strong augments with Fairy Treasures 3 and that Cybernetic Bulk 1, so that way they can get a lot of items and combine those items with cybernetic value. So this is a pretty bad loss. And so you know what? I said that it might lean to his game plan, but right now things are looking a little dicey for 60-second. I'm thinking that he kind of wants an item here for Yone, because Yone is really, really important to get the proper items. The build that people often look for Yone in particular is Titans, a healing item like Bloodthirster or Hand of Justice, and then Quicksilver. And then if you are able to kind of navigate around that, maybe you end up going for damage items instead. Like he has an Infinity Edge. You might go Infinity Edge, Hand of Justice, and a Quicksilver. Oh my god, he actually hit up a Ziggs. He had the option of, by the way, going for a Quicksilver, but opted against it. So 60-second is rolling here, finds a Riven. Okay, he's going for Edgelord Riven instead. I think this is temporary when I'm looking at it, because the thing about Riven is that she caps lower, and he actually could lean into Riven carry, but no, actually, maybe this is an opportunity for him to make it happen. Is leaning away from Riven carry, and there's a reason why Riven carry is not really popular in the meta, is that she just really can't hold up to a bunch of really strong tanks and a lot of CC. And so I think his setup isn't as good for it. So he sells immediately and rolls again, recognizing that he needs to stabilize his HP and his tempo as best as he can. And this is starting to look really, really bad. Trying to roll as much as he can down. Oh my god, he finds a Cane, but I was going to more say that he didn't find a single headliner that he's really happy with. He's rolling to 0 and now trying to commit to Samira. And this is just temporary. Again, he's renting a bunch of headliners to try to borrow combat strength for 1 turn, selling them immediately a turn afterwards, and hoping that the Samira can kill 1 extra unit or 2. It's looking like he's going to go 8th at this rate. Okay, so he's using his team builder and putting the crowd divers, committing to Yone. And now he needs to sell. Okay, he finds this Yone. If he can find a Yone headliner with this duplicator, if he can survive a couple more rounds, might be able to get that Yone 3 online. But now we're kind of in the desperation mode where, yes, we might be able to hit Yone, but we don't have that HP preservation, and we still have that Ziggs 2 player that's in the back of our mind. So how is he going to navigate around this? If I was in this spot, I'd probably be telling my chat all the excuses I have. Oh man, I worked all day. I'm tired, or there's just so many things I have on my plate. I'm so overwhelmed. That's why I'm not doing well. Okay, we hit Crowd Diver Yone, which is exactly what he needed at this point. He was angling for it, and he ended up hitting Yone. He's 1 Yone off. And I like that he rolled down to 0, by the way, because he recognized that it was always going to be him staying at 7 and rolling to 0. So he's just playing for the best possible board he can at the moment. And he also hit a Kiana, which is incredibly high roll. Actually, it was rolling so fast, I hadn't noticed that by hitting this Kiana, he also has the opportunity to print some items. And so he end up getting like a pretty crazy bailout. But that's what this comp is, you know. Quite frankly, I do think that Yone is a high roll oriented composition. If you're able to get it online and going, it has an immense amount of cap potential because 6 crowd diver is really strong and Kiana can print you a lot of items. But until you're able to get to that point, you're often trying to struggle to stabilize. I'm also a little bit surprised he made even shroud, but I think it's okay because Kiana and a Yone 3 with these item setups is still really, really good. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the augment setup here. We have long distance pals, portal forge, and cybernetic uplink. You could uplink stack, and the uplink ends up being decent because it helps the Kiana and the Yone just scale a little bit more. So you could justify doing that. Long distance pals in general is a little bit awkward this set. If you ever play things like Alawi, by the way, currently the tentacles are bugged, and long distance pals ends up messing that a lot. Also, if you end up playing KDA long distance pals, it's not very good. So because he's not playing either Alawi and the KDA, I think long distance pals is actually better than usual. And it's an argument that I think people forget about because they're avoiding it in a lot of other situations that are really common right now. Because mainly in Superfan, you're playing a lot of KDA and then Alawi just goes on like all the boards. But if you know you're not going to play either of them, I think long distance pals seems pretty good to me. Portal Forge is not particularly really strong because he already has 3 items onto his Yone. And also there's a high chance that he doesn't really get anything that he really wants. If you get like, you know, Manazane and AP stuff, it's a little bit more awkward. I guess Manazane could go on Kiana, but it's not particularly good. And the only thing that you really want for Portal Forge is probably like an item for his Mord 3, like a Anima Visage or a Eternal Winter, which is like okay, but not amazing. So I think I'm down to re-roll some of these options. I think Long Distance Pals is the strongest out of the 3. He gets opportunity for Blank Slate, but Blank Slate is too late. And also he has to sell his existing board, which he wants to roll for anyways. And also he hit the perfect Yone headliners, so not really what he's looking for anyways. So I like Long Distance Pals here a lot. He's hesitating and he's thinking about support cash. Oh, he skips Cybernetic Bulk for this. Oh my god, he found Banshee's Veil. So now he has Quicksilver as well on top, and that was one of the outs he could have played for. Finds Echoes, he gets true damage, and he hits the Yone 3. Oh my god, this game went from, I think he was like guaranteed A to an insane spike. All right, so he's high rolling, but I mean, come on, you have to be high rolling to keep up with a lobby like this because there's so many strong boards. This guy has Bard 3 with stationary support, Vampirism, and Cybernetic Uplink 3. Oh my god, look at this Yone. So he has the ideal situation set up. So this actually goes back to something we talked about at the very beginning. Remember when he rolled Cybernetic Bulk and I said sometimes you just gotta take the safe option instead of gambling because your spot isn't that bad in the very beginning of the game? This is the exact situation that's now inverted, which is the worse the spot is, the more you have to take those risks. And that's exactly what 60 Second needed to do because he recognized that his spot was pretty bad and he needed to kind of play for the high roll to get himself out of the situation. Otherwise, he is going to just play for like almost a guaranteed 5th or 6th. And so for him, the way that he orients his playstyle is, listen, either I hit and all of a sudden my game is saved and I'm able to hit like this Banshee Veils and I go for that Yone 3, or I go 8th and I can get out of this game because this game is looking really bad already. And just look at how powerful everything is. He picked up the Zed, by the way, so he has a 6 crowd dive ready to go. Just need to push levels. Now he has the Yone 3 and the Kiana printing. I love the fact that he has them next to each other so that way the Kiana can even shroud, and also you want to have them targeting the same unit so that way it's likelier for Kiana to get the kill. Echo holding the Banshees makes sense because he gets the true damage activation as well for that bling bonus. I don't think you can do anything with this spat, which I think is a good shout out. The only emblem I think you can use is probably a true damage emblem. Everything else is either uncraftable or just doesn't really make sense. Like Pentakill is probably okay, but then he gives up like the edgelord aspect of things, and everything about his comp is totally okay. I also like that he's not rushing. I think we talked about how powerful 6 crowd diver is. In fact, let me go ahead and bring up something for you. So if you look at Tactics.Tools Explorer, this is a data website that allows you to dive in deep when you set certain parameters. In this case, I filter for every game that has Yone 3 and a 3 items on him, aka you're gonna itemize him as your carry, as well as Kiana. If you look at the traits, the difference between 4 crowd diver and 6 crowd diver is a placement and a half swing the opposite direction. This also applies to Katarina as well. I applied some filters. Look at Katarina 3 with a 3-star and 3 item count. The difference of hitting 4 crowd diver versus 6 is a 2.5 placement swing. So 4 to 6 crowd diver is a massive spike, which is trying to emphasize how high roll that Kiana was so that way he can get it. Although there's a couple of ways that he could have also gotten it, whether it was just getting it off the carousel on stage 4 because he's really behind on HP, or just going to 8 and often rolling for it. But just to emphasize that 6 crowd diver is really, really crucial for his win condition. And I think the stage is set for a big comeback here. The other Another thing to keep in mind, by the way, is that you ultimately do want things like the edgelords try to attack each other, because remember, edgelord scales off of how low the target's HP is. The lower HP that they have, the more attack speed that you get. And so he has things like this Kale and this Yone kind of working in tandem together. So it's a nice little shout out there, small positioning thing. Now his HP is in third in the lobby, and he's made this really big comeback. And you can start to see like why this build is getting momentum, because if the stars align, it is pretty high roll, I will admit. It does look really, really strong, and you get to print some more items if this Kiana is able to get onto the right target. I think leftover items end up going on Kiana and Zed, because while you do end up playing for things like the edgelord onto the Viego, it really is about the crowd divers more than anything. And just look at how fast he's crushing so many of these boards, right? This is the Ziggs 2 board that was really strong. He also inverted his positioning because he's not trying to have Yone like ramp up and then get to the carry. If he can just crush through frontline while he has the tempo advantage of having a strong 3-star Yone, he just wants to get to the carry as fast as possible. And this is generally what melee carries want to do. It's a little bit on the rare side that melee carries want to be away from the enemy carry. A couple exceptions is if the enemy carry in the backline is like really high single target burst, you don't want to get focused down and your opponent has a lot of stall. So that's like usually a scenario where you don't really want that. So say for example, someone has like a Jhin, you probably want to make sure Yone is not targeted by that Jhin if he's like really souped up and folks firing on that Yone. And then they have like other things like, you know, a Lowy and a Thresh right in front so we can stop him. That's what makes this Banshee Veil so insane, because it stops the CC that can really get to him. Oh, interesting. So he ends up putting the Even Shroud onto the Viego instead. And then that way he can get a third item onto Kiana. So now he's just fully itemizing Kiana as a secondary carry. And look how fast he's just eliminating the back line. Just 2 melees is all that it takes for Yone 3 to delete the back line. This build is pretty insane. I need to be playing some more Yone if I get the spot for it. Like another aspect that ended up being really nice is that his items end up panning out really nicely. Things like the IE and the Hodge and the game like the Titans Resolve. But once you get everything going, this off meta build is very powerful. Okay, I actually really like the way he also repositioned. I want to insert a little tip here as well. Go ahead and watch how he does this in slower motion. This is an actual APM trick that you can increase the speed of how you reposition. So a lot of people, when they position, do something like this. They grab Yone and they put him here on the right. They grab Echo and then they place him on the right and switch with Mordekaiser. And they grab Viego and then they switch with Zed. And then finally they grab Kale and moves to the right side as well. But if you zigzag, you can actually double the speed of how you position. So first he's going to click Yone and put it on the right side here in A7. Then you click the Mordekaiser and swap it in with the Echo. And that does the exact same thing as grabbing the Echo and switching with the Mordekaiser. And then that way, since your mouse is already here after dropping the Mordekaiser on A2, you grab the Viego and swap it with the Zed. And then finally you can move the Kale over to the right side. And that little trick ends up increasing the amount of time that he's able to actually wait and bait his opponent into a bad positioning. And look at it, this Yone already gets to the back line, slice and dice, and that TF, carved turkey. That is a really nice execution on some positioning nuance at really high levels that some players are trying to do to get the edge. And quite frankly, like he doesn't have much to think about with his composition, right? This is kind of going back to some previous reroll comps that we've seen, which is like, now that your composition is done, there's not many things to think about in terms of like pushing out units. So how do you maximize the strength of your board? Think about positioning. The one small thing is, does he want Katarina behind the Yone so he can get a little bit of that wounded anti-heal? Maybe, maybe not. I do think that part of it is probably he wants the crowd diver effect. Crowd diver tends to target the farthest unit. So when these crowd divers die, like Zed and this Katarina, it's going to jump to the farthest unit, aka this Twist of Fate, which might be good enough to stun and stall. Now, none of them are actually dying, which is a little bit annoying. Maybe we'll see in a different fight, but you get what I'm trying to get at, which is the crowd divers are trying to help this Yone ambush like the enemy carries on the specific corners. All right, so we're very close to 6 crowd diver. He already has a fully souped Kiana. I'm down to start picking up some items for Zed. Bloodthirster is pretty decent if he wants to just put this on the Zed. Even thought about putting things like the cloak onto the Zed for cybernetic value and then opted against it, which is actually really interesting. Not entirely sure why. Maybe he thinks he can get to 3 item on Zed and therefore feels like if he puts a cloak onto that Zed, it's going to be a useless item later. There's also the possibility that he wants to save this for a Kiana item. If Kiana is able to give him another component, he wants the flexibility of saying, hey, like maybe this cloak ends up being a better item on Mordekaiser if it gets like a Dragon's Claw, as opposed to just putting a cloak on Zed. And then all of a sudden that free component that he got off Kiana, like so, could end up being worse if he ended up just committing that cloak onto that Zed. Okay, so he ends up getting a cloak so he can make a Bramble Vest. And now he's top 3. Is third the highest that we can get after all this high rolling, we're just gonna go third. The other two players are streaking, so they're very strong. We got that early recompop Ziggs, which we talked about, felt like he was playing for second, and then a big time Jazz board, but the Jazz ends up having some awkward items like Peace Gloves onto Lucian and then carries Sona. So if he can get past all this front line, Sona needs time to ramp, and this is a composition that can blitz their opponents so fast that they don't actually have time to ramp. And look at that. So he found the weak point of dodging things like the tentacles and having the Yone get to the back line. It's very close. There's another thing you can think about, which is using the tentacles to manipulate edgelord positioning. So that way he can get to the backline even quicker. A lot of times people aren't thinking about how they're positioning their tentacles with Alawi. And so what ends up happening with the edgelords, they dash through it and they attack from the other side, which is a really big deal. Okay, so we open up the armory and probably another Zed item here because Zed is really important. Gets the 9, plays 6 crowd diver, which is really, really powerful. Gets a Zed 2. That's everything that he's looking for at the moment. If you can find a Kiana 2, that's really good. So going back to the tentacle point, if there's a tentacle that's positioned right here, a lot of people tend to put their tentacles just spread out across the front line. If the edgelord ends up dashing through and then finishing out the tentacle here, they have a very strong likelihood of just immediately targeting the back line as well. Because instead of staying stationary and attacking from the front line from this angle, they dash through it. All they have to do is just turn around and then swipe at the backline carry. So probably what he's looking at right now, if he can maybe manipulate that, but it seems like for the most part, he may have messed up his Banshee's positioning, especially because he has a quicksilver on Zed already. So this is actually disaster. If he loses here, it's purely because of stuff like positioning. But it doesn't matter. The Yone got to the Ziggs. By the way, that Ziggs player has 7 Ziggs, going for Ziggs 3. Oh my god, this game is winnable now all of a sudden. If he's able to win this game, I think I'm 20 out of 20 Yone. This is ridiculous. Gets his Sunfire Cape. I can't believe he actually didn't have anti-heal up until this point. Needs to fix his positioning, but as we talked about, was maybe thinking about how he wants to utilize the Yone to get to the back line and maybe even use some tentacle action. Okay, so he's giving Banshees to the Zed. Maybe the attack speed ends up being really good, but now he's in front of the tentacle. You see how Yone immediately dashes around it, and it doesn't actually work out in this instance because the frontliner ended up being next to tentacle. But I think you can understand like how that tentacle can be used against the opponent. He ended up being on the wrong side because the Yone ended up focusing the front line, and then as we were talking about before, that carry, as soon as they were focusing down that Yone, got to a really strong burst point, and it was a little bit too strong. We have a Kiana 2, but we can't actually afford it right now. Brutal. We need a lock and hope that we can get this fight win. Oh, we end up getting really lucky and getting a ghost fight here, which is really huge. And now he can actually just blitzkrieg. I think he's actually favoring this matchup again. Wow. So he's beating these Ziggs boards, and the Ziggs player is also winning. It's very, very close for second place, but I feel like it's a little bit of rock, paper, scissors. He can beat the Ziggs board. The Ziggs board beats the Jazz board, and the Jazz board beats us. If he can just find a way to survive against the Jazz board, he could actually win the game. Goes for Last Whisper. Last Whisper is the only pickable item here because there's only blue buff and stone plate, things that don't really move the needle very much. I mean, I guess you could do an item like, you know, for a K on the back line, but it really doesn't matter. And he'd rather just have a third item on Zed. Plus, it means that Zed doesn't have to be next to his Even Shroud or to get armor reduction. Okay, so he swaps on the other side. Finally, last fight, potentially. Going against the Ziggs player, trying to see if he can get past the tentacle. He does. Oh, but the Yone dashed back to the front instead of going to the back line. Wow, he did it. He did it. He beat the Ziggs player again. And the Jazz player did not actually end up losing, so no one died. Okay, we hit Viego too, so we are super capped. I mean, this is as good as it gets. He did get an extra component, so now he gets final cybernetic value onto the Kale. Oh my god, a Diamond Hands got rolled onto the Blitzcrank. That's so bad. Diamond Hands stalls for exactly the amount of length that we need. And 62nd just goes for a simple mirror swap. He gets it on the opposite side of the Lucian, but there is that Alawi. That Alawi 2 is in front of that Yone, which is really problematic. He was able to get past it. He did. And Yone kills the Sona, and the Lucian just has AP items. That's a top 2. That's top 2. Oh my gosh, we actually did it. We actually got a second. Okay, so now it comes down to whether or not we can win this game. His opponent sold half his board. Is he going for Ziggs 3? I'm not entirely sure actually, but if I'm in 62nd spot, all you need to do to stop that Ziggs 3 is to get one single Ziggs, and you'll be able to deny it because there's only going to be 9 copies of the pool. You could probably go for an item onto Viego, maybe red buff or guard breaker. It's totally fine. Just a little bit of damage onto these edgelords. I think Katarina is not that strong at 2-star. His opponent's rolling and selling his board. Wait, is he actually just throwing? I think he actually just wins this game. The guy just FFs. The Ziggs player has such a bad matchup, and it doesn't matter if they have a full legendary board full of Ziggs and all the other stuff, knows that this Yone can actually be dealt with. And so from the depths of the abyss, able to hit these major inflection points, get that Yone 3 online, hit that early Kiana, play to his outs, and ends up getting a really nice victory with an off-meta composition. Well done, well done. And you can see why China really believes in this composition. So there you have it. The Yone Crowd Diver composition that is slowly but surely starting to take over the China server, but a lot of people are still not playing it. And if they do, they're not necessarily playing to the correct outs, because sometimes they're playing a little bit more Heartsteel, or maybe they're taking a little bit too many edgelords. Maybe they're focusing too much on having Yone and Riven. It's just the Yone show, and we're all living in it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video of In Too Deep. Good luck there on ladder, and I'll see you guys next time.